Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL NewsRadio, your legacy home of the Cougars. It's a Black Friday edition, Friday, November 28th here on Cougar Tracks, and I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper, getting you ready for BYU versus UCF. 1 day away until the 11th-ranked Cougars look to officially punch their ticket to the Big 12 championship game, and that's where we start things off in our top story of the day.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
10-1 BYU versus 5-6 UCF in this Big 12 clash to determine, well, if BYU goes to the Big 12 championship game or if UCF punches its ticket to the postseason as they look for their sixth win on the year. BYU is clearly the better football team in this game. There's no doubt in my mind about that. You look at this matchup, BYU outclasses UCF in many aspects of this game, but I do believe that UCF will keep this game somewhat competitive maybe early on. I think there's going to be a lot of fight from Scott Frost's squad. Pretty good defense in the Big 12. One of the best, honestly, in stopping the pass. They've got some talented secondary players in Jaden Bellamy, a former Notre Dame and Syracuse transfer, and Antoine Jackson, an East Carolina transfer. UCF's going to show some fight, and BYU, of course, being a little bit shorthanded, expected to be with Chase Roberts doubtful for Saturday's game against the Knights. You know, BYU's going to have to lean on that ground attack, which they have no problem doing that, averaging 201 yards on the ground this season is BYU. The passing offense for the Cougars, 213 through the air. BYU can win in a variety of ways, but with your top pass catcher out, or at least expected to be out, being doubtful, that will, force more pressure on BYU's ground attack to be successful. One of the things is that UCF's defense, rush defense, they give up 153.6 on the ground. Not the greatest there. They're ninth in the Big 12 as UCF in allowing 27 points per game during Big 12 play. UCF's offense is not great. They're 14th in Big 12 play, averaging only 19 points per game. So again, I think BYU comes in as a sizable favorite, and rightfully so. I mean, you're the 11th ranked team in the country. You're 10-1. Overall this season, you're the winningest program in the Big 12 since last year. You're stepping into your final home game of the year. 18 seniors are going to be honored. Act like it. Look like a dominant team. And I'm not going to, say style points, just dominate your opponents. And that's going to impress the committee because we know this committee, because of that stretch Y, is not impressed by much. The resume should be enough to impress and be enough style to say to this committee, yeah, this team belongs in the college football playoff, but clearly that hasn't been the case. And playing a 5-6 UCF team is not going to suddenly say, oh yeah, BYU needs to be in the college football playoff. So unless this is some 100-0 game, which, spoiler, not going to happen, there's not many style points to really be gained against this opponent, in my humble opinion, for BYU. BYU needs some chaos in front of them to happen to potentially move up the ladder, and maybe we'll see some of that with Black Friday, and then, of course, the Saturday slate around college football. You look at this matchup, though, but again, I think UCF will be motivated coming into this game. 11 a.m. kickoff, 1 p.m. Eastern time here on KSL NewsRadio and ESPN2. Extended pregame coverage begins at 8 a.m. Myself and Kyle Ireland, we will get you ready for the Cougs and the Knights here in Provo as BYU looks to get an 11-win season in the regular season. Think about that for a second. You got to go back to when that last happened. That was 2020. Well, 2020, they go 10-1 in the regular season. You got to go back to 2001. The last time that BYU won 11 games in the regular season. So it's been a minute for the Cougars to get that level of success in the regular season. They're knocking on the doorstep of that. And if they can win this game, they're going to be heading to Arlington to likely face the Texas Tech Red Raiders next week. I think LJ Martin's going to be a big focal point once again. I think you give LJ about 23 to 25 carries on the ground this game. And then you factor in another 3 to 4 touches through the receiving game where he continues to improve on that front. LJ is going to get another big workload because, again, with UCF's talented secondary, and they're really good. I think Bellamy might be a top 3 cornerback in the Big 12 this year. It's going to be tough to pass on this team, especially with Chase Roberts doubtful in this game. So LJ, give him a big workload, and Bear Bachmeier as well, who Kalani Sitake said is fine because Bear was grimacing a little bit in the fourth quarter of that game against Cincinnati. Kalani said Bear's fine. He'll be good to go for this game. Some players besides LJ to watch that I think in this game for BYU, Tiger Bachmeier. Could we see him actually pop off a big play or two in this game? I think with the absence of Chase Roberts, it creates the opportunity for that to happen. Now, Parker Kingston's going to be the number 1 wide receiver, and Aaron Roderick this week talked about how it's been confirmation of what his belief was for Parker heading into this season, that he could be one of the top pass catchers on the team. He has been that. Parker's been really good this season, with the exception of the special team muff punts. Parker's been really good. But I think there's an opportunity for Tiger to pop off a big play potentially, maybe a quick screen that can go for some big yards with that speed. You know, Tiger hasn't been much of a factor this year. It's funny because, you know, we've seen a lot of stories about him naturally because of Bear and Tiger and the brothers and things like that. But Tiger hasn't had his spotlight yet. Could this be the spot? I wonder on that because you got Parker Kingston, you got JoJo Phillips, who will be your top 2 guys. You've also got Cody Hagan, and then you've got Tiger Bachmeier, Reggie Frischnecht, and then kind of a distant spot, Tay Nakua. This could maybe be that chance because you know Bear wants to get his brother involved. There's been spots. There's been opportunities. Think of the Iowa State game. We started to see a little more work towards Tiger. Maybe this could be the game where we see Tiger Bachmeier have a breakout moment. I also wonder, too, could this be a spot where Senior Day gets to amplify some of the seniors on BYU, some of those 18 players on the senior class? Do they get a chance to have their final moment here in Provo? Remember a couple years ago in Independence, that was the only thing that was the storyline was Senior Day, and then also, you know, which players that are young guys are going to get playing time. How have things evolved since then? Now Senior Day is kind of a distant memory or distant thought or storyline heading into these sort of matchups to close out a regular season where it's all about Big 12 championship, college football playoff, much more entertaining storylines than simply, hey, it's Senior Day and you got the Senior Day blanket. Let's see what freshmen are going to play to maintain their red shirt. Even Jay Hill, when asked about that this week, he's like, no, not probably many guys are going to play. The guys that you've seen play are going to play, and that's going to be that. They're not going to factor in some new faces to maintain red shirts unless, of course, the score lends that opportunity. But I think, again, UCF could make this a little bit difficult at times for BYU. I think BYU takes care of business, and I'll get to my score prediction coming up a little bit later, but I think that, you know, UCF's going to show some fight in this game. They've got some intriguing individual talents. Quarterback Taven Jackson, he had 271 passing yards last week against Oklahoma State, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's a former Tennessee and Indiana quarterback. His top target, though, is a tight end. Dylan Wade, watch for him. He's their leading receiver on the season. Last week, 4 catches for 145 yards and 2 touchdowns. 6'2", 240. He's 24 receiving yards away from becoming UCF's all-time leading receiver at the tight end position, and he's only a junior, so keep an eye out for Dylan Wade. Miles Montgomery, he's a former Cincinnati running back who BYU faced 2 years ago. He's the 7th leading rusher in the Big 12 play this season. He missed the Texas Tech game, had a pretty okay game against Oklahoma State, but BYU has faced him. Jay Hill has 2 years ago when Montgomery was with the Cincinnati Bearcats. But this will be also a game, too, where BYU needs to prevent the underdog from having long scoring drives. UCF this season has had 15 drives of 75 yards or more this season. So no methodical drives need to be allowed for UCF, because if they can have that early, that could give them, you know, some optimism and some confidence that they can hang around in this game. And for BYU, they've got to start off strong. If you can get this thing up to 14-0 in the first quarter, you put the hammer down, and then this is game over. And then you can have that celebratory senior day where all 18 seniors can play. Everyone can get their moment. Freshmen can play. You can get those valuable snaps. It can be really something that could be a celebratory day as BYU looks to punch its ticket to Arlington officially. 11 a.m. kickoff at LaVell Edwards Stadium between BYU and UCF right here on KSL News Radio. Let's take a break. On the other side, we'll get to my score prediction for BYU and UCF right here on Cougar Tracks. It's powered by KSL Sports. Cougar Tracks rolls on here on the KSL Sports YouTube page every single day. BYU Sports Talk on the YouTube page or audio podcast platforms. Appreciate all of you for subscribing to the show wherever you get your podcast. So the latest update for BYU football versus UCF in the availability report coming from Thanksgiving night. No drastic changes. Max Alford, Sione Moa, they are the officially out players for Saturday against the Knights. Doubtful remains Chase Roberts, Waylon Lapuaho, Anisi Purcell, and Ulavai Fetuli. One player did get upgraded. That's Peyton Van Steenkiesty. I'm probably saying that wrong. I got to double check on that. Questionable, the safety player who's also playing on special teams. I think Peyton's a pretty good player. He's a good athlete. I think he could be one to watch maybe down the road, but it's just a busy safety room for BYU. But that's the availability report for the Cougars and the Knights. But now we shift our focus to tonight as BYU basketball gets set to take on the Dayton Flyers in the championship game of the ESPN Events Invitational. Big win last night for the Cougars, taking down Miami 72-62, and they face a Dayton squad that's 6-1 this season. Anthony Grant, the head coach for the Flyers, I think one of the better head coaches in college basketball that doesn't get enough respect. Even Ed Cooley last night in his press conference here in Florida noted, the Georgetown head coach noted that Anthony Grant, one of the more overlooked coaches, I think, in college basketball. Grant does an excellent job with Dayton. He's been the head coach there since 2018, so this is his 9th year with the Dayton Flyers. Proud basketball tradition Dayton has. BYU has had 3 previous meetings against Dayton, one of which was in 1951 in the NIT. That, of course, was the year BYU won the NIT. The Cougars took down the Flyers in Madison Square Garden. Then they beat Dayton 3 years later in 1954 out in Dayton. And then 3 years ago in the Battle for Atlantis, the basically avoiding last place because BYU went into that game 0-2, as did Dayton. BYU was down by 23 points in the first half, and the Cougars stormed back to get an overtime victory over Dayton. Richie Saunders, coincidentally, when asked earlier this week at the team hotel his favorite memories at these holiday tournaments, and he pointed instantly to that win over Dayton back in the Bahamas in 2022 as one of his favorite memories in these holiday tournaments. Dayton's a interesting challenge for BYU as they will full court press you for an entire game. And last night they looked pretty good, Dayton did, against Georgetown, but they gave up a big run to the Hoyas to allow the game to go into overtime. But Dayton will pose some challenges for BYU with that full court press. But the nice thing is for BYU is they've got guards who are good ball handlers, but quick. You know, Rob Wright's speed could be a real difference and highlighted in a matchup where you got a team that loves to full court press and just bring a lot of pressure and speed up a team. And hey, Rob Wright, when it comes to speed, he is more than willing to play that sort of game. One thing that did catch my attention with Dayton, though, they've been shooting the ball pretty well 3 of the last 4 games from beyond the three-point arc. They've shot for better than 40% from 3 in 3 of the last 4 games, 42% knocking down the tray against Georgetown, 11 of 26. Then you go back against Marquette, they hit 41% of their threes. So against power conference opposition, they've been pretty good. Against Cincinnati, however, they only shot 2 of 26 from 3 against the Bearcats. That's their lone loss this season for Dayton. That was against a Big 12 foe in the Bearcats. But Dayton, their top scorers, Javon Bennett, a guard, he's averaging 16.1 points per game. Deshane Montgomery, 14.9. And then Amel Leeting, 13.4 for the Dayton Flyers. But I think for BYU, handling the press will be key. I think also defensively, too, continuing to excel on that end of the floor. Because we know BYU's offense, they will have flashes and stretches where they will be looking like the best offense in college basketball. We know they have that ability. I think the thing is continuing to stack up those days, in the words of Kevin Young, on the defensive end. Because if BYU is going to be a Final Four team, and look, BYU's got the talent to do that. They're top 10 in Ken Pom right now. We're inching closer to that AP Top 25 ranking that some would say always determines what will be the national champion. It's the Week 6 AP Top 25. Teams that are in the top 12 of that AP Top 25, I think it's like the last 15 years, someone in that grouping has won the national title. BYU currently sits at number 9 in the AP Top 25. So if you get a win here, you likely stay in the top 10, maybe climb, and you're kind of hovering in that range to be in that grouping of teams that ultimately decides a national title. So everything's in front of BYU to this point of the season. They're 5-1. I think playing some really good basketball. I think the big issue, though, is what does the rotation look like with Dawson Baker's injury? That was unfortunate to see him go down. We'll see what ends up being the outlook for him long term. But Kevin Young expressed last night his thoughts and prayers are with Dawson. So I would be pretty stunned if Dawson played tonight. Just being transparent there. I mean, that would be pretty shocking. If the guy that was getting helped off the floor, that'd be quite the turnaround in one day. But what does the rotation look like? Who takes his minutes? Because only 7 guys got more than 10 minutes yesterday in the win over Miami, and one of those guys was Dawson Baker. Does it become an opportunity for Alexei Kostic, a sharp-shooting guard, to get a chance to get more minutes? Do we see more minutes for Dominique Diomande, who played some good basketball in stretches in that first half? Really curious to see what that rotation looks like now for the Cougars. It's unfortunate because you thought Kennard Davis returns, but then Dawson Baker goes down with an injury for BYU. Just a tough spot there for Kevin Young and his rotation and just this team, because you could tell even though BYU got the win over Miami, there was a little bit of a subdued feeling from the team because that Dawson injury was just unfortunate. Him having to be helped off the floor, it kind of just took a little bit of took the cells out of the team a little bit coming off the floor from that win, because Dawson's such an important piece to this team, and hopefully he can have a speedy recovery for this group and be back to the floor as soon as possible. But it's the Cougs and Dayton Flyers tonight, 7:30 p.m. Mountain Time tip, 9:30 p.m. on the East Coast here in Kissimmee, Florida. I apologize to the locals saying it incorrectly yesterday, so my bad on that. Kissimmee, Florida, Cougs and Flyers in what should be a good game. I think BYU wins by double digits. I think, maybe 11 to 12 points. I think BYU gets this victory and hoist another MTE title. It'd be the second and third 3 years for BYU. It'd be the first in the Kevin Young era to win one of these MTE multi-team event holiday tournaments for the Cougars. I didn't realize this either. First MTE for BYU in the state of Florida since 1991. That was when the O Arena was recently opened. BYU faced the Fab Five of Michigan and then took down Florida in the consolation bracket of that tournament. So it's been a long time since BYU played an MTE out here in Florida. And it's been fun to be out here to watch this BYU team in action. It was a great crowd from BYU fans last night. Dayton fans had a good turnout too last night. So I expect probably a sold-out crowd, I would imagine, for BYU versus Dayton. Should be an electric atmosphere between these two fan bases going back and forth. But I think BYU ultimately comes out on top. And I'm really curious to see kind of the final numbers for BYU's big three in this one with A.J. DeBonsa, Richie Saunders, Rob Wright. They've got to carry the load, man. They've got to be spectacular every single night. And then Keita taking care of business on the defensive end. Most blocks in a single game by a BYU player, his 7 blocks since 1991 when Sean Bradley had 10 against Virginia in the NCAA tournament. So Keita, remarkable player. If that guy was 6'11", 7 feet, maybe even 6'10", he's probably a surefire NBA draft pick. But his explosive athleticism, gosh, he is a freak. It's so much fun to watch him sitting courtside and just marvel about his masterclass that he showed on the defensive end. It was quite the sight to see, to watch Keita operate last night at the State Farm Fieldhouse in Kissimmee, Florida. BYU and Dayton again tips off at 7:30 p.m. Pregame begins at 6:30 on KSL NewsRadio. We've got you covered for the call of the Cougs and the Flyers for the ESPN Events Invitational Championship here in Florida. Then BYU football tomorrow between the Cougs and the UCF Knights. Kickoff at 11 a.m., and I'll be inside LaVell Edwards Stadium. So quick turnaround for me from Florida to Provo, basketball to football. Cannot wait. And we're covering it all here on KSLSports.com. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports YouTube page. Mitch Harper here with you. It's time now on Fridays, my score prediction.
Score prediction. Will BYU come out on top? It's time for Mitch's score prediction for the next game.
You know how we roll here on Cougar Tracks every Friday, giving you the score prediction for the next BYU football game. And I'm very confident BYU wins this game. I'd be pretty stunned if BYU lost this game. Not saying it's impossible. It's the Big 12. Anything can happen in this conference. But again, I've been on this show consistently talking about how consistent of a football team BYU is, and that consistency will once again show itself on Senior Day against the Knights as UCF makes its first trip to Provo since 2011. I think BYU wins comfortably in this one. I think BYU 31, UCF 10. It feels like a type of score that not awe-inspiring, like how did that happen type of game, but a solid, sound beatdown that we've typically grown accustomed to with Aaron Roderick, Jay Hill, Kalani Sitake-led BYU football teams. Not going to be glitzy, not going to be glamorous, but it's sound, it's effective, it's efficient, and it's complimentary football. I think they'll put up a big day on the ground with LJ Martin and Bear Bachmeier. I think BYU is going to run the football a lot. I think BYU's defense maybe gets a touchdown. It would be great for Tanner Wall, who's been an excellent playmaker in his BYU career, to get a pick six or something along those lines, to have a moment like that again at LaVell Edwards Stadium. Obviously, 2 weeks ago, he had the pick six against TCU. Would be great to see someone like Tanner Wall have that moment again. Maybe a Jack Kelly pick six. Remember, he had one against Portland State earlier in the season to open up the year. So something like that would be great for particularly the seniors on the defensive side to maybe have a defensive touchdown. That would be great to see. I think BYU's defense completely stuffs UCF's ground attack with Montgomery. UCF, 23% stuff rate this season. They have, and which is percentage of runs getting stuffed behind the line of scrimmage. So I would expect some good number of tackles for loss by BYU's defense. BYU's defense also has been doing a nice job in terms of sacks this season. I think they reached the 20 sack total this season during conference play. They're trending up as a defensive unit. And I think they get to Taven Jackson a handful of times in this game here on Saturday. And then keep in mind, too, for UCF, this is the biggest crowd that they're going to face this season. The only other time that they faced a crowd of more than 60,000 fans was against Texas Tech 2 weeks ago. They lost that game 48-9. And I'm not going to say, the crowd single-handedly has an impact on games, but it does play a role. Home field advantage in college football is a much bigger deal than other sports. I think college sports in general, home court, home field, it's a bigger deal than pro sports. And BYU's home environment, even in the morning, will be electric, and something of which that UCF has simply not seen to the degree of BYU. Texas Tech gets loud. We saw that in Lubbock earlier this month. But I think Provo is even more electric because I think fans sense the opportunity that's in front of BYU, because you think about what this program has always wanted, access to the biggest stages. And look, the man is still saying BYU doesn't belong. But you know BYU sports, they're always looking to break that wall down and prove their worth. And this is a chance to punch your ticket to the Big 12 championship and get an opportunity and a stage to prove your worth as a program. I expect the fans to be ready to roll coming up on that morning kickoff, 11 a.m. Curious to see Cougar kickoff and maybe just the excitement level for that, because 2 years ago for the Oklahoma game, when that was the 10 a.m. kick, there was no excitement, no energy for that game. But granted, BYU was a 3-touchdown underdog and going through a losing streak at that time, whereas this spot, BYU has everything in front of them. Keep in mind, too, the score that I put up, 31-10. Look at the baseline of what Aaron Roderick wants from his offense, about 3 points per drive. I would expect 10 to 11 drives in this game once again. Last week in a game against Cincinnati where they ran the football a ton, they had only 10 drives. I think that's a good benchmark for this game, so you get to around that 30-point mark for BYU. Maybe it could go higher with the defensive touchdown or two if that sort of thing happens, but I think 31-10 is a safe bet, and BYU wins by 3 touchdowns and moves to 11-1 and gets to Arlington for the Big 12 championship game. That's going to do it for this edition of Cougar Tracks. I hope all of you enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to the show. Leave a 5-star rating and a review. It helps out the show a ton. And I will be back tomorrow after BYU versus UCF from Provo for the Cougs and the Knights to recap the post-game action. You'll hear me on Saturday morning with Kyle Ireland to get you ready for kickoff and a whole lot more as BYU football wraps up the regular season and BYU basketball tonight here on KSL News Radio. So tune into that here on Cougar Tracks, and it's powered by KSLSports.com.